If at this stage, 500 days plus into this war, Vladimir Putin is still using food as a weapon, what does it tell us about his military?
Well, what it tells us that it's not just his military that's failing, it's his entire strategy that's failing. He's going to use every tool in his toolbox to try to end this war, whether it's economic, whether it's food insecurity, as you mentioned earlier, whether it's the military, whether it's diplomacy with countries such as China. But if you look at it in aggregate, it's not working.
General, speaking of diplomacy, Erdogan has already come out and said he's going to try to convince Putin, when he sees him or potentially even a call before, to join this grain deal. I just got back from NATO in Lithuania, and Erdogan was really works the room to try to get as many concessions from everyone. Do you think he could be effective in this scenario?
He is quite the diplomat. He is quite the leader. However, he never seems to be able to close the deal. He wanted to be part of a peace initiative, was unsuccessful. He wanted to be a strong member of NATO, strong friend of the United States, really hasn't cut the deal. So I'm sure he's going to try. I'm just not sure that he's
But he's likely going to get those F-16s for allowing Sweden in.
He had so many demands that he asked for. If the only thing he got was the F-16s, he's not a happy man.
General, we want to hear from you about the status of this counteroffensive and what's actually happening on the ground. Now, Vladimir Putin is vowing retribution after an attack on the flagship bridge to Crimea. But there's a lot of confusion about where exactly this war of attrition lies here after so much time spent and where Ukraine is in this counteroffensive. We just gave them, or at least greenlit, the use of cluster munitions, for instance. Where are we in the next couple of weeks?
Well, I think you said it right. We no longer have a war of maneuver. What we had hoped to have seen out of Ukraine is a counteroffensive that busted through the front lines and started fighting as a maneuver force. Unfortunately, it's starting to look like World War I out there. Neither side is making a lot of progress. The Russians have a extraordinarily deep, layered defensive plan, and the Ukrainians can't seem to get through it. So I think at this point, they're no longer looking at maneuver. They're looking at trying to attrit each other's force structures, force sizes.
Joe mentioned those cluster munitions, which I know has been controversial for the administration. Ukraine actually has already received the first tranche of those cluster munitions. And Vladimir Putin was speaking on Russian television. He said there will be a response if they are used. But Russia's already using cluster bombs. So,
That's right.
So what would the response be?
Well, I don't think he's going to use tactical nuclear weapons. However, there are some assets that he has not brought on the battlefield yet, which could actually be quite devastating to any counterattack by the Ukrainians. For example, he's not used fuel-air explosives yet. That's an extremely, extremely potent capability where basically a number of planes fly through the area dropping gasoline, for lack of a better term, but very, very high incendiary gasoline. Wow. So you can imagine a counterattack with 50 tanks, all of a sudden fuel-air explosives come over. It will suck the air literally out of that area, and it'll probably stop that in no time at all.
Sounds horrifying.
It is horrifying.
What do you make of the debate right now about military readiness in Washington, knowing that a lone senator from Alabama, Tommy Tuberville, is holding up now hundreds of military promotions in a blockade to protest the abortion policy at the Pentagon? I've heard different answers on this. Is it actually impacting our ability to fight?
Well, first of all, I think all of us that were either formerly in the military or currently in the military know that that is absolutely the wrong way to try to affect policy in the United States military. However, every unit has an executive officer. Every unit has a number two. We're in the business of having people killed on the battlefield. And if that company commander is killed, the executive officer has got to take over. So the deputies that we have throughout the military who want to take over, who are capable of taking over for the commanders, while it may be extraordinarily unfair to the incoming commander who has not been confirmed, I don't think it affects readiness a bit.
What about the NDAA? The National Defense Authorization Act must pass, usually bipartisan. In the past, when we saw individuals vote against it, it was because they thought the defense spending was too much on the very right and left. And now it's really about culture issues.
Yeah, that's unfortunate as well. We have worked over the years with supplementals and other types of budgeting mechanisms But I certainly hope that this budget, now that affects readiness, Joe, far more than who's the commander. That will affect not only current readiness and capability of the military force, but in many ways our ability to assist Ukraine in this fight.
But this is all a show. It gets done, correct?
Not necessarily. There have been a number of years when we haven't had a defense budget.
That would be a major story and one that we're following closely here with the budget debate. Annmarie, questions about Taiwan after an interview that the former President Donald Trump conducted on Fox over the weekend. This is an interesting one, knowing that being tough on China is one of the few bipartisan activities that we have here in Washington, D.C. He was asked about what he would do if Taiwan were invaded by mainland China in an interview again on Fox. Listen to how he answered this question.
Should the U.S. help defend Taiwan if it means going to war with China?
Well, I don't want to say it because if I'm in the position of president, I don't want to say what I'm thinking. You know, if I answer that question, it'll put me in a very bad negotiating position. With that being said, Taiwan did take all of our chip business. You know, we used to make our own chips. Now they're made in Taiwan.
With that being said, suggesting that because Taiwan, as he said, took our chip business, we might not defend them? General, how do you read that as we walk into a presidential cycle that could, you know, have a lot to do with that debate?
Well, two things I would say. Number one, President Trump reinforced what has been the policy of the United States with regards to Taiwan for the last 50-plus years. Sure. That has only been violated by this administration, which is the notion of strategic ambiguity. As he said, I don't want to say what I would do up front. It's good to see that he's adhering to formal U.S. policy. On the other hand,
wink, nod.
It came with a but.
But it came with a but. That's exactly right. Let me not support the former president, but let me just simply ask a question. Does America want its sons and daughters to fight and die to defend Taiwan?
I can't begin to answer that question, but then again, I'm not the one here to answer questions, General.
Right. Well, I think you can say the same reason we're not putting American sons and daughters into Ukraine may be the same reason that we're putting so much equipment and so much firepower into Taiwan, so that, like Ukraine fighting Russia, perhaps former President Trump is saying, well, if it can work in Ukraine, maybe it can work in Taiwan.